Have you ever felt someone's presence enter the room before they even spoke a word? Not because of anything they did, but because of everything they didn't. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels charged. A stillness that holds the entire room captive. It doesn't scream for attention, yet it commands it. It doesn't disrupt, yet it disarms. It doesn't argue, yet it dominates. This is the kind of quiet power that Niccolò Machiavelli understood better than most. He mastered the art of strategic restraint. He knew that every time you argue, you step into a battlefield someone else has chosen. You engage in a war you didn't start, and worse, you give up something far more valuable than your words, your positioning, your presence, your inner control. Because in that moment, you abandon your frame, you let go of your composure, you trade your invisible advantage for a fleeting need to be right. And for what? To prove something to someone who likely isn't even listening. Machiavelli saw what few dared to admit. True influence never begs to be recognized. It doesn't shout to be understood. It draws others in without stepping into their emotional chaos. It moves quietly, powerfully, undisturbed, and that's what we're going to explore today. Because choosing not to argue doesn't make you weak. In fact, it may be the boldest strategic move you can make. A decision that protects your peace, elevates your presence, and separates you from the noise of a world addicted to conflict. In a society that constantly shouts, silence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, egos unravel. So let's take a deeper look at why arguing rarely serves you, especially if you seek real power. Because Machiavelli, and thinkers from Sun Tzu to the modern masters of influence, all echo the same principle. He who argues exposes his weakness. Why? Because argument appeals to logic, but humans aren't ruled by logic. They're ruled by pride, ego, and emotion. The moment you argue, you reveal that you can be provoked, that you need to prove yourself. And for those fluent in the language of power, that's the most obvious sign of weakness. In the realm of influence, it's not the strength of your reasoning that matters. It's the need to reason at all that betrays you. That's why the most powerful people don't fight for control. They already are in control. They lead through presence, not protest. They win by letting the other side believe they've won. Because here's the harsh truth. When you argue, you don't change minds. You harden them. Every word you fire isn't piercing their beliefs. It's helping them build a stronger fortress around them. You're not breaking through. You're helping them dig deeper. Why? Because now, it's personal. You've poked their ego, and nothing fights harder than wounded pride. And so, the more you push, the more they resist, not because your logic is flawed, but because their identity feels threatened. And when identity feels under siege, logic dies first. That's why arguing creates enemies. Not clarity. It breeds bitterness, not resolution. And more than anything, it shrinks your presence. It makes you look reactive, emotional, and ungrounded. But silence, on the other hand, creates something rare. It creates mystery. And mystery, in the game of power, is a force stronger than explanation. Because when you stay composed, when you refuse to jump into the mud that others invite you into, you send a signal far louder than words, that you're not desperate for validation, that you can't be baited, that your peace isn't up for negotiation. That's why the truly powerful don't defend themselves. They don't explain. They don't plead. They influence not by pushing, but by planting. Their ideas take root, not because they shout, but because they last. Machiavelli understood this. and so did those who came after him. True command isn't found in how loud you speak, but in how little you react. In the grand chessboard of life, it's not the most aggressive player who wins, it's the one who stays quiet and watches. Because when you say nothing, you force the world to make its next move without knowing your position. And that blindness, that is your ultimate advantage. The man who controls his tongue controls his fate, because silence, when chosen with intention, speaks louder than any argument ever could. Arguments don't just expose logic, they expose weakness. They crack your mask. They feed your ego while starving your presence. But silence builds an invisible fortress around you. One that no insult, no provocation, no emotional outburst can penetrate. Let's talk about the hidden cost of arguing. A cost that thinkers like Machiavelli and the Stoic philosophers understood with razor-sharp clarity. The moment you argue with someone, you're not just raising your voice, you're stepping into their world. You're accepting their narrative, you're reacting to their bait, and even if you think you're winning the argument on logical grounds, you've already lost something much more important, the mystery that once shielded you. When you argue, you reveal your boundaries. You show people exactly where your patience ends, where your ego begins, and where your inner calm breaks. Even if you win the verbal exchange, you've lowered yourself into the emotional arena, where perception matters more than truth. Because let's be honest, the one who doesn't argue becomes something far more intimidating, a fortress with no doors. Unreadable, unshakable, untouchable. Machiavelli, just like the Stoics before him, knew this ancient truth. Power doesn't come from being the loudest. It comes from being the most immovable. Silence, when used wisely, isn't passivity, it's a mirror. It reflects the other person's pride, their emotional hunger, their desperate need to win. And in that stillness, they begin to collapse under the weight of their own noise. Because most people don't argue in search of truth. They argue to control, to provoke, to drag you into their chaos. They want to test their strength against yours. But when you don't take the bait, when you stay silent, they're left swinging at air, battling a shadow, and they exhaust themselves, fighting something they can't touch. Understand this deeply. Power does not come from having the last word. It comes from not needing a word at all. The man who speaks little but observes much is untouchable. No one knows his thoughts. No one knows where he stands. No one can predict his next move. He becomes a question no one can answer, a puzzle no one can solve. And that mystery? That silent presence carefully guarded, it's stronger than any argument ever spoken. Because in the end, the man who refuses to argue is never truly defeated. He remains unreadable, undefeated, and completely in control, while others waste their energy throwing words at a ghost. Silence protects power. Now, let's explore why this form of silence isn't just a tactic, but one of the most strategic shields you can ever carry. A timeless truth understood by both Niccolò Machiavelli and the ancient Stoics, deep within the Prince. We've said it before, the truly powerful don't need to speak. Their steady presence is the loudest declaration. Now let's go further, to see the complete portrait of a person who holds power in silence. When you're still arguing, still explaining, still trying to prove you're right, it usually doesn't come from logic. It comes from fear. Fear that if you don't speak up, you'll be misunderstood. Fear that if you don't justify yourself, your worth won't be recognized. Arguing, then, stops being a conversation. It becomes a disguise for insecurity. You're trying to tie your value to the ever-changing opinions of others. But the person who truly holds power, they move differently. They understand. Approval is a fragile currency. True influence doesn't come from being understood. It comes from remaining unmoved, even when misunderstood. The calmest man in the room isn't feared because he's loud or aggressive. He's feared because he's untouchable. You can't bait him. You can't provoke him into a fight. He doesn't try to win the room. He becomes the room. Machiavelli didn't invent human nature. He simply laid it bare. He revealed a truth that still echoes today. The world is not moved by emotion, it's moved by strategy. And when it comes to argument, he was brutally clear. Persuasion is for the powerless. Influence belongs to the strategic. Because the moment you enter an argument, you've already stepped down from the position of command. You've entered a game set by someone else, dancing to their rhythm, not yours. But when you stay silent, when you observe, when you withhold instead of react, you rise above the chaos. You let others wear themselves out trying to win, while you conserve energy for the moment that truly matters. You see this pattern everywhere in modern life. In business, the person who sends long emotional emails, the one who reacts instantly in a meeting, they've already revealed their attachment to the outcome. And when your attachment shows, your leverage weakens, but the one who listens with intention, nods at just the right time, and speaks only when their words can shift the entire room, that person holds real power. People don't remember what they shouted. They remember the moment he said just one thing and changed everything. In relationships, arguments turn affection into rivalry, love into a battlefield. Every word becomes ammunition, every silence a new front line. But the one who refuses to argue, who steps back, recalibrates, and lets actions speak, they win not by overpowering, but by mastering their own emotions. Control doesn't mean dominance. It means being so rooted in yourself that no one else's chaos can pull you into their storm. And this truth holds in public life too. The person who fights every comment on social media, defends every insult, reacts to every slight, they become predictable. A reactor, not a leader, but the one who holds their tongue, who lets time, truth, and action speak on their behalf, they become untouchable. They create the rarest power of all, mystery. And as Robert Greene reminds us, mystique is not an accident. It is a weapon. So next time someone tries to pull you into an argument, pause. Watch carefully. They're not just debating an idea. They're baiting you into their frame, into emotional quicksand, where you'll lose your footing. The moment you step in, they control the tone, the tempo, the arena. But if you stay silent, if you observe with a cold mind, if you let their need to be right expose itself, then you hold the board. You command the game, without saying a single word. In the last part, we talked about holding your position, not by raising your voice, but by allowing others to expose themselves through their own need to be right. That's how you win, without ever lifting a finger. Now let's go deeper. Machiavelli never wasted energy chasing fairness. He wasn't concerned with appearances. He cared about one thing: results. And when it comes to results, arguments are not just useless, they're destructive. They take small sparks and fan them into full-blown fires. They turn momentary tension into long-lasting grudges. They transform potential allies or neutral observers into enemies. Worst of all, they give everyone around you a clear view of your emotional landscape. Your reactions, your triggers, your weaknesses, and in doing so, you hand them the playbook on how to control you. So, what should you do instead? You observe, you listen, you absorb everything, but you reveal nothing. You study the terrain with quiet patience. And when the moment is right, you act. Not with long explanations, not with emotional arguments, but with clarity, with finality. You move with precision, like a blade in the dark, clean, silent, effective. Let others flood the room with noise. Let them exhaust themselves trying to be seen, heard, validated. Meanwhile, you remain a fortress, calm, still, unshaken. And when you finally choose to speak, when you finally move, your words do not fall like scattered arrows in the heat of battle. They land like a hammer, sharp, undeniable, final, not meant to debate, not meant to persuade, but to end the conversation before it ever truly begins. That is the ultimate Machiavellian play. That is the Stoic discipline, the refusal to argue, to speak only when it truly matters, to let silence say what anger never can. Because silence cannot be twisted, it cannot be misquoted, it cannot be used against you. It floats above the noise, unshaken by the desperate need of others to be understood. In the end, the man who grasps this truth understands that his greatest weapon isn't the sharpness of his argument, it's his indifference. And within that indifference lies a power that no flood of words can ever overpower. Refusing to argue isn't weakness, it's strength in its most unshakable form. It's a command for respect, spoken through stillness. Let's now look even closer at this strength, the hidden advantage of not engaging, the subtle dominance that both Niccolò Machiavelli and the Stoics understood all too well. But few today have the discipline to wield. Because the true power of silence? It doesn't just prevent chaos, it creates clarity. It opens a space, a vacuum, where your words, when spoken, are not diluted by desperation. Where your mere presence grows heavier, more commanding. In a world obsessed with volume, where shouting is mistaken for significance, silence becomes the rarest and clearest signal of power. Machiavelli, ever blunt in his view of human nature, saw this with total clarity. Silence isn't emptiness. It's tension. It's gravity. It pulls others in. Arguments? They do the opposite. They scatter your energy. They expose your emotions. They hand others a map of your psychological triggers. When you argue, you surrender the high ground. But when you remain composed, when you speak only with intent, when you move only when it truly matters, you turn silence into an invisible field of force that bends the room around you. Think about it. And now, we step into real-life situations, where composure becomes an invisible weapon. Razor sharp and devastating. Picture this. A colleague publicly challenges you. They expect a reaction. They want a heated comeback. A verbal showdown in front of everyone. But if you bite, what are you really doing? You're giving them exactly what they want. You're turning their provocation into a performance for the entire office to watch. And just like that, you've been pulled into their game. But what happens when you stay calm? When you gently acknowledge only what truly matters, and shift the conversation away from emotions and back toward outcomes, you've already diffused the bomb before it even ticks. You don't defend yourself, because you're not there to perform. You're there to deliver results. And it's in that rare stillness that people begin to lean in. They listen more closely. They begin to respect you, not for what you argue, but for what you refuse to explain. Now consider another example. An emotional partner lashes out at you, hoping to drag you into their storm. If you respond with rage, if you let yourself ignite with their chaos, you lose. You lose your frame. You lose your peace. You lose yourself. But if you stay grounded, if you speak only when necessary, or choose silence until the storm burns itself out, you remain in control. You don't win by overpowering their emotions. You win by refusing to be pulled in. Even in the modern arena of social media, where responses are instant and everyone rushes to clap back, this principle still holds. The moment you start explaining yourself, defending yourself against petty criticism, you lose your presence. You go from being the one above the crowd to just another voice in the noise. And as Machiavelli would remind you, the moment someone feels the need to explain themselves, they've already lost respect in the eyes of the crowd. In those moments, silence isn't weakness, it's a filter. It helps you decide what's truly worth your energy and what should simply be ignored. Silence turns provocation into background noise, a kind of white noise. But why is silence so hard to hold? Because the ego whispers. It tells you, you have to win, you have to speak, you have to have the last word. And when you listen to that voice, you're dragged into petty arguments, exchanges that don't lift you up, but pull you down. A Machiavellian mind doesn't feed its own ego. It uses the ego of others. It watches. It allows others to reveal their impatience, their insecurity, their desperate need for validation, while it remains still, untouched. Because every time you refuse to argue, you're gaining something far more valuable: information. The more they speak, the more they expose their intentions, their weaknesses, their blind spots. And the more you stay silent, the more you become a mystery. And what do people fear most? The unknown. Not because you're hiding something, but because you've mastered what they themselves cannot control. Here lies the paradox. The person who refuses to argue often becomes the most persuasive. Why? Because silence cannot be debated. It cannot be refuted. It cannot be twisted. A man who doesn't argue isn't surrendering. He's watching, calculating, choosing his moment. And when he finally speaks, his words carry weight. They slice through the noise like a sharpened blade. His silence isn't retreat. It's a weapon still sheathed, artillery waiting in reserve, ready to strike when it counts. And Machiavelli understood a darker truth. When you argue, you teach your opponent how to manipulate you. Every defense you offer, every emotional slip you show, you're giving them a map of your mind. What you value, what you fear, what provokes you, and all that becomes ammunition in their hands. But if they can't provoke you, if your calm remains unshaken despite everything they try, you've stripped them of their greatest advantage. In the previous part, we saw that the one who remains calm in chaos, the one who doesn't let emotions take the wheel, is the one who truly holds the power. But what happens when that calmness becomes so consistent, so grounded, that no one can even guess what you're thinking? You become unreadable, and the unreadable man is always the most dangerous one in the room. But make no mistake, being unreadable doesn't mean being silent forever. It means you only speak when your words serve a strategic purpose. Because the Machiavellian mind does not react impulsively, it selects. And through that selectivity, it builds a kind of respect that cannot be asked for, cannot be demanded, it can only be felt. Let's look at how this unfolds in real life, in personal conflicts. When people throw accusations to drag you into the mud, your calmness becomes their frustration. In debates, when others attack you and you don't defend, but instead respond with clarity, or even just silence. You become the one who quietly controls the room, without ever raising your voice. In leadership, when crisis hits and others panic, the leader who doesn't over-explain, doesn't perform, but moves decisively and silently, becomes the pillar others cling to for stability. This isn't theory. This is how real influence is built. Even in warfare, Sun Tzu said, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, to win without arguing, to rise above chaos, not by matching it, but by transcending it." That is Machiavellian warfare at its finest, psychological dominance, without emotional cost. So, how do you apply this mindset in everyday life? Especially when you're challenged. Pause, breathe, let the tension rise, without needing to release it. If you must respond, use short, calm phrases like, "You're entitled to your view," or say nothing at all. Let them wonder, let them doubt, let them talk themselves into exhaustion. In digital spaces, social media, comments, messages, you don't need to respond to everything. Engage only if the conversation aligns with your long-term vision. You don't owe your energy to every critic, every comment, every provocation. Silence is not weakness. It's a deliberate filter, keeping you on course while everyone else drowns in noise. In personal relationships, refuse to match emotional outbursts. Refuse to justify yourself when unfairly attacked. Instead, slow things down, create space, and choose your response not from emotion, but from command. In business, don't defend, deliver. Let your results speak louder than words. Let your execution, your impact, your consistency be your argument. Because here's the final, undeniable truth. You don't need to win arguments when you've already won yourself. When your confidence comes from within, when your peace is not dependent on external approval, when your value is rooted so deeply that no insult can shake it, you no longer need to demand respect. Your stillness commands it, because true power isn't found in shouting matches. It's found in the man who can sit still, unmoved, unprovoked, undefeated, while the world screams around him. The man who refuses to argue is often the one winning battles others never even see. He doesn't lead by chasing attention. He leads by moving with quiet certainty. He doesn't seek validation. He simply exists with such unshakable calm that others feel compelled to follow. He doesn't fear being misunderstood because he understands something deeper. Disciplined silence speaks louder, hits deeper, and strikes harder than 1,000 frantic words ever could. If this message resonated with you, hit subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. And in the comments, just write, "Stay silent," a quiet reminder of the power you carry within. Stay grounded, stay patient, stay untouchable. In the next part, we'll go even deeper into the art of mastering yourself in a world that constantly demands your reaction. And trust me, it's worth it.